Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, guys, whether you're watching me on YouTube or on Rumble. I almost forgot that my podcast microphone was on the other side of the desk. And the other day, some of our followers says why the volume of the guests are usually lower than mine, because basically I have a podcast microphone and they don't have that. Usually many people just use their mobiles or use their laptops, and the webcam and the volume or the microphone is not the best. And I can not do anything about that because it's not in my hands, as I say, and I don't have a studio. This is a home office. This is my living room where I live, and I created, with the help of my wife, this very modest, let's say, studio, lights, microphone, webcam, and this is how I bring to you the analysis, commentaries, interviews, podcasts, conversations with many people around the world. So sometimes people need time to get better in their work. If you compare the work that I was doing in 2017 with what I do now, there is a huge difference. And every day I try to make this work better. I think about it, I plan for it, and I also want to host more quality and better guests in the future. Most of the guests that we had on this channel were great, and I would like to host more guests on this channel. And if you have anyone on mind that you would like me to host, even if he or she disagrees with my opinions, drop the names in the comments below and I will look into them if I am able to invite them. Sometimes I invite people and they don't come. And sometimes these people are on a similar political, let's say, position of mine, and they don't come because they get so big and they start charging, and or they only go on YouTube channels that have 500,000 or 1 million subscribers, and they don't come to, let's say, smaller YouTube channels. Although here on Syriana Analysis, I present quality work and analysis. So if you're new, I invite you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. I would really appreciate that. And we're going to speak also about censorship during this stream. So if you're worried of censorship and you see what's happening with Rumble, with Telegram, and next could be also on YouTube because they're purging before the elections, I encourage you to create an account on Rumble for now. I also have my channel being active there, and at the same time I'm broadcasting on YouTube and on Rumble. And last question to you guys, if any of you know and you can help me in this, I would really appreciate it. Send me an email. The email is in on my YouTube channel. I would like to broadcast the same stream. I'm using StreamYard program software, and I am able to easily broadcast it to YouTube and on Rumble, but I couldn't broadcast it to Rockfin. Rockfin is another good platform which I want to broadcast it there, but I'm unable to do it via this software. I was able to put the stream link and also the key of the streaming in Rockfin, but it didn't work out. So if you know, please send me an email so that I can arrange this also in the near future. In this streaming, we're going to speak about the Ukrainian incursion into Russia, which in my opinion, it was a surprise offensive by the Ukrainian side, and it has raised lots of questions about, first, the competence of the Russian forces and also the competence of the Russian military leadership on the borders, which left these parts of the city unguarded or lightly guarded, and the Ukrainians were able to invade these territories and hold up until this moment many of these towns there, and they took many prisoners of war with them. And this is, in my opinion, also a blow to the reputation and the image of Russia. So in this video, however, we're going to discuss if this Ukrainian offensive against Russia is going to be fruitful, because remember, in wars, guys, there is something called temporary victories that you can show to the people and raise the morale that you have managed and successfully managed to capture one place and took some videos and captured some Poles with you, prisoners of war. and this could raise the morale. However, military planners, successful military planners, in my opinion, do not think this way. This is a short-sighted tactique. The strategists and military planners, they always see in the future, and they also want to preserve the gains that they have achieved at the current moment. So if you cannot hold the territories that you just occupied, then, and if the cost is very high, then it's not a successful operation. But nowadays we live in the era of the mainstream media, scripted analysis, commentaries by the so-called security analysts who are spawning everywhere, both on social media platforms and also on TV channels nowadays. Today, we're going to start this conversation together with an article published by the National Interest. So we have two articles in the National Interest in the past week, and both of them, two of them contradict each other. They reach to completely, let's say, different conclusions. And I'm going to show you both of them, and you make your mind which one is more convincing to you. And I will tell you later my opinion about it. And this is good to present both sides of the story, and then we try to make up our minds in this case. So first things first, this is an article published, let's see, because Ukraine's, okay. So this is the first article, right? The article says Ukraine's Kursk offensive has revealed Russia's military weakness. And this is published by Elliot Petrov. And he's a researcher at a think tank. He doesn't have a military background. He wasn't an officer. He wasn't a general. He wasn't a colonel. And he didn't study in a military college. However, he presented his opinion. He says, over the past 2 weeks, Ukraine has taken its fight with the Kremlin onto Russian soil. Kiev's offensive consisted of a daring raid into Russia's Kursk region designed to bring the fight to Russian forces and draw the Kremlin's combat troops away from its own territory. Aside from a few headlines, though, Ukraine's bold strategic gamble, and this is a correct explanation here, because he says Ukraine's move here is a bold strategic gamble, has gone largely unnoticed. That's a shame, because Kiev's initiative and Moscow's response to it has made clear that persistent Western fears of Russian brinkmanship are overblown. And I'm going to come back and comment on that. He says it has also laid bare the hollowness of Moscow's threats of strategic escalation in response to battlefield setbacks. Ever since the current conflict broke out in February 2022, the West has been concerned that poking the bear could prompt Russia to use nuclear weapons and escalate the war into a full-blown showdown with NATO. But Ukraine's push north, through which it has managed to seize over 480 square miles of Russia's Kursk Oblast, hasn't elicited much of a response from Russia. To be sure, the Kremlin has mobilized in response, declaring a federal emergency in the region and redeploying troops, tanks, and artillery from the Ukraine front to so far unsuccessfully beat back the invaders. However, what Russia has done is retaliate against Ukraine or its partners with any significant, is retaliate against Ukraine or its partners with any significant escalatory measures. President Vladimir Putin has not ramped up the conflict in conventional terms, nor has he used nuclear weapons against Russia's western neighbor, as Russian officials have threatened in the past. As dominant as Russia's strongman wants to appear, his government is in a far more precarious position than the West originally believed. Putin's bluff has always been that he would be more willing to turn up the heat if the war doesn't go his way. Ukraine's daring offensive, in other words, has laid bare a couple of critical truths. The first is that Russia is weak and constrained by the same sort of real-world limitations that afflict other powers. The second is that Ukraine, though embattled, can still find ways to break the stalemate and win this war. So we have to raise few points here, guys. First things first. This is a gamble. Yesterday, when we spoke with Hala Jaber, who is a 6-time award-winning journalist with 30, 40 years of experience in covering the wars in West Asia or in the Middle East, she explained the Iranian approach vis-a-vis Israel. And she said that Iranians are carpet makers. And imagine how slow is the process of making a carpet with your bare hands. And she explained how the Iranians are playing chess with the Americans and with the Israelis. And this is a long-term strategy. It takes decades because the United States entrenchment in the region and the Israeli dominance over the region, militarily, economically, and in terms of bullying, it took them decades to build this. And you cannot come in one way or another and destroy it with the gambling, with firing some missiles, Scud missiles, cruise missiles, some hypersonic missiles on Israel and cause an all-out war. And then the entire world, basically the Western world, the Brits, the Americans, the Israelis, the Germans, probably Australians, the rest will come and join the fight against you. That's a foolish act if you do it. And the same thing should apply to other countries, including Ukraine. This is a gamble, and it's not a chess, what Ukraine has done in Russia, because eventually, when you calculate the manpower, in terms of the manpower, in terms of the artillery power, in terms of the aerial superiority, you will see that Russia is able to defeat the Ukrainians. It will take them time to contain the attack because in the military terms, I've seen so many defeats in Syria from the Syrian army side that there were many military installations and many of the towns and villages. The army withdrew all of a sudden from these places because the enemy will inflict heavy casualties among their ranks. So the priority was to withdraw, contain the attack, and arrange a counteroffensive against them. And in this case, in the Russian case, and I'm not here like trying to say that the Russians will win this war, I'm trying to explain to you and analyze to you, regardless of what these so-called Western pundits tell you, that the Russians will absorb this attack, they will contain it, and then they will come back with another counteroffensive, and they will kick out the Ukrainian forces from the Kursk Oblast, and at the same time, they will continue their operations in the eastern side of Ukraine. And you see, like, despite the Ukrainian attack in the Kursk Oblast, the military operations of the Russian forces in eastern Ukraine, and especially in the Donbas region, hasn't stopped. And the villages are still falling in the hands of the Russian forces because Russia has prioritized this territory, and they know with the redeployment and the reinforcement that they can do inside Russia, they will push away the Ukrainian forces from the Kursk Oblast. So this is gambling, and it doesn't mean that Russia will lose this war. This is wishful thinking from the Western analysts in regards to their enemies. This is not the job of a journalist to have a wishful thinking, and it's not the job of the journalist to tell the officials to increase the pace of a war, because they're not doing the fight. And these people are just serving the establishment by such narratives because in return, they will receive very good salaries, right? I don't believe in any Western analyst who says, let's go to war and increase the pace of the conflict because, look, Russia, we poked the eye of the bear and the bear didn't react, because they don't react. There is a huge misunderstanding of the American enemies, the Brits, the Germans as well. I'm talking about officials who take decisions and these people who work in think tanks, the journalists, etc. They misunderstood their enemies. Russia, China, Iran, Syria, the rest of the countries that they hate and they want them to be destroyed, divided, conquered, they misunderstood them. These countries are rational actors despite what they say. And they will not come and use tactical nuclear weapon and destroy the world because of the Kursk Oblast. Yes, it's a very painful blow for them, but at the same time, they have to be rational, reasonable. And at the end of the day, we say in Arabic, بدك العنب ولا بدك الناطور, which means, do you want the grapes or do you want the wagon of the grapes? You want the grapes, which means you want the butter of the story. This is what we also say in Arabic. So what's the grape here? The grape is to liberate or recapture the Kursk Oblast. Are you able to do that with conventional weapons? Yes, you can do that. So why would you use tactical nuclear weapons would be only possible if in my opinion, NATO intervenes directly and a direct clash happens between the both sides. And God forbidden, like we should pray that this scenario won't happen, right? We want for this to be solved in diplomatic means and not to escalate into a full-blown war. So coming and saying, ha ha ha, I'm poking the eye of the bear and look, the bear is not reacting. Yes, because they don't do reactions, but rather they plan what type of actions are they going to take in retaliation for such attacks. And you see that since the beginning of this Russian offensive on Ukraine, the Russians also developed their strategies and they also changed their tactics and they also started using heavier, let's say, and more sophisticated weaponry. It all depends on also the type of weapons that Ukraine is receiving. So the pace of the conflict always increases slowly, and it's not like you go from here to here all of a sudden. And these analysts do not understand, unfortunately, these realities and these details, and it's really harmful for the public discussion, and also it manipulates and brainwashes many people into believing that Ukraine now is able to reach some sort of a victory against the Russian forces. Another article, which is this is the worst this week. This is the worst article. Like this article could win the worst article of this week. It's coming, of course, the Telegraph, the British Telegraph, because you remember the British establishment is the most enthusiastic about this war more than the Americans. So the article says the fall of Vladimir Putin is now only a matter of time. Wishful thinking or truth? Let's check. It has been the most efficient offensive of the entire war. Ukrainian intelligence identified the Russians' weak points. Special forces crossed the frontier in advance to prepare the ground, and when the attack on the Kursk Oblast came on 6th August, it was a textbook example of what strategists call an all-arms maneuver. Cyber attacks were combined with armor, artillery, infantry, and specialist engineering to dismantle enemy defenses. Russian drones and sensors were blinded by electronic warfare. An air defense umbrella was thrown up, closing the skies of Putin's planes. At first, it looked like a limited cross-border raid. Preparations had been made in such secrecy that Ukraine's allies seemed to be as much in dark as her enemies. And this is, I can assure you 100%, this is a complete BS. If you think that the Brits didn't know, if you think that the Americans didn't know about this move of Ukraine, nothing can help you, to be honest with you. If you think that the Americans didn't have knowledge or the Brits didn't have in hand this cyber warfare against the Russians, I suspect that it was done by the Brits, by the British special forces, disguised in civilian dresses, and some foreign legions and volunteers, etc. They're the ones who are carrying this cyber warfare against Russia, paving the way for the Ukrainian forces to move inside Russia. This is just my speculation, but I believe in it. And I think that the Ukrainians had a very direct role in this incursion into the Russian territory. Still, this is the most significant Ukrainian victory in 2 years. Russian infrastructure is being targeted, bridges thrown down, gas installations hit. What is Ukraine's strategic goal? As is often the case, the offensive had a chief objective and several secondary ones. The principal aim was to alter the calculus within Russia, making the war less attractive and turning key figures against the man determined to prosecute it at any cost, Vladimir Putin. First, the Zelensky government needed a morale boost. The failure of last summer's counteroffensive had wiped out the successes of the previous autumn's Kharkiv and Kherson campaigns. So it's about morale first, as I told you. Yes, so it's gambling and it will raise some morale. Now at a stroke, Zelensky has reminded his people that they can still win. So occupying Kursk, does it mean that they are able to win this war? Those are completely two different things, right? You need the manpower to win this war, which you don't have, basically. Second, that the same message has gone out to Ukraine's allies in Europe and North America, some of whom were asking whether they should open-endedly support an apparently unwinnable war. It seems now clear that if Ukraine's NATO allies explicitly authorize the use of long-range missiles within Russia, Ukraine will continue to make gains. Third, the attack is intended to draw Russian forces from Ukraine, which didn't happen. Fourth, Russian prisoners of war are valuable bargaining chip Ukraine wants to return of its Azov volunteers and other troops. Yeah, this is something that they can do, and Azov are something that they always miss and forget intentionally to mention that it's a neo-Nazi battalion. Fifth, Ukraine has significantly tilted the negotiating table in its favor in advance of any final settlement talk. As long as Russia occupied chunks of Ukrainian territory, Zelensky had little to bargain with. Now he has opened the door to land swaps. I mean, look, if you want to land swap with Russia, and if you occupy 1,000 square meter in the Russian territory, then they could return to you 1,000 square meter in your territory. It's not like they're going to return to you Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and many of the places that they recently occupied. This is, again, wishful thinking. So, but all these are, as I say, subordinate objectives. Zelensky knows that the surest way to end the war is to topple Putin, who has a mystical longing to establish some kind of protectorate over Kiev, which he sees as the birthplace of Russia. Ukraine's strategy then is to make the war unpopular with Russians. In 2002, Putin made a big song and dance about creating the Collective Security Treaty Organization, an alliance of 6 former Soviet republics intended as a response to NATO. Yet he has not triggered its Article 4, the mirror of NATO's Article 5, which requires the other members to treat an attack on one as an attack on all. Perhaps he senses that the others will refuse to help. Or perhaps they don't want to do it because the Russians didn't ask them to do it, firstly, because they have plenty of forces that they can carry these operations against the Ukrainians. Plenty of generals and oligarchs will see that Putin is isolating, disgracing, and ruining their country in pursuit of what is little more than a personal obsession brought on by reading too much history during lockdown. Prigozhin's mutiny exposed Putin's vulnerability. Sooner or later, someone else will act decisively where Prigozhin hesitated. Everything Ukraine is doing is intended to hasten that day. Now, my opinion on this article is that it's a complete wishful thinking from the author's side, that he thinks that the inner circle in Russia, they will turn against Putin. If you are objective and you know anything about Russia, you will see that Putin has been criticized by the inner circle for being late to invade Ukraine and for being too, he's too self-restraining in this war vis-a-vis NATO and Ukraine, which is a proxy war there. There are so many hot-headed politicians and officials and people whispering in the ears of Putin. Some of them are writing on social media platforms. If you see these people, they are hawkish. Putin is a balancing force in Moscow. And rest assured that if Putin is gone under such circumstances, the replacement is not going to be someone who's going to come for an appeasement with NATO. Even if somebody turns against him now in these circumstances, for example, when Prigozhin, he ran again against the defense minister and the defense ministry, his main protest was that the defense ministry was not giving enough weapons and not giving them enough authorization to use force in certain geographies. So the so-called pundits in the West who think that if Putin is gone and somebody more moderate will come, they're missing the point that Putin is the moderate here in the eyes of the Russians. These people do not know the Russian society, do not know the Russian history, and they don't know the current circles of power in Russia. And rest assured, if Putin is gone, I think there is going to be a major escalation. And in this case, what Putin is doing is wise by not really first triggering the CSTO, this collective security organization. Why would he ask for the CSTO if this gives the justification for then Ukraine to call NATO into this conflict, one? And two, if the Russians can do it themselves, then why again should they call for their allies or their partners to come in this conflict? They already have enough financial lifeline routes with China, and now they have made their strategic partnership with North Korea for artillery shells, and their production powerhouse is already strong, and the GDP is doing well. The economy is doing well, actually, in Russia, compared with the European countries and compared with the American countries. And this is something that It's not even mentioned in the article. I think this Kursk invasion was a failure for the Russian forces, for the Russian leadership, and especially that they couldn't anticipate and see that it's coming. I totally give the credit for the Ukrainians for the element of the surprise and planning and keeping it secret from Russian side that they didn't see it coming. I totally give that, but it's still a gamble. It's a gamble. It's not a strategy. It's not a chess. It's a gamble, and and they will eventually withdraw from the Kursk Oblast. I'm just saying what's going to happen, like I said, since 2022, and I called for diplomacy because I know what's going to happen there. Unfortunately, many people do not believe it until they see it. And now the Russians are bombing the energy infrastructure of Ukraine. There is a electrical outage in the country, and Kiev is under attack, right? I mean, the Russians are not carpet bombing Ukraine. And they're not using the American war style, like if they do it, Ukraine, they will not be standing building in Ukraine. And that's a horrible thing to happen. And I'm not calling for that, right? I think at the end of the day, the Ukrainians will hopefully understand, and not the regime, because I don't think that Zelensky will understand it, but the people in Ukraine, they will understand that this was a big, big trap going into Russia, and this will reflect very harshly against them, but through time. This will happen because it needs planning, and they have to calculate the response, not like these Western pundits think Russia should do, like just do some emotional reactions against the Ukrainians. That's not going to happen. Now, one last article about this case, and this is coming from the same website, the National Interest, and this time this is published by James Holmes. Now, James Holmes, he is chair of maritime strategy at the Naval War College and author of Visualize Chinese Sea Power. So he is a military man and he has an experience in military affairs. And this is what he says. The greats agree Ukraine's Kursk offensive is strategic malpractice. Strategy, he says, means setting and enforcing priorities. This takes self-discipline. It makes little strategic sense to hazard what matters most for the sake of something that matters less, no matter how big-willing. For Ukraine, a combatant that stands in mortal peril, the foremost priority must be to hold as much Ukrainian ground as possible while striving to regain lost ground. The notion of wresting territory from Russia exodus a certain allure and the logic that paybacks are hell. But do the prospective rewards qualify as exceptional? It's hard to see how. If not, Ukraine's leadership should cut the foray short. Clausewitz, who is Karl von Clausewitz, historically, he is the Prussian general and military theorist, and he lived in 1780 and died in 1830. And he wrote a book which he couldn't finish it at that time, called Von Krieg, or On War. And he put lots of military strategies in his book. So he's quoting from him. He says, Clausewitz cautions the commander against running undue risk in the principal theater in order to pursue lesser aims elsewhere. And he defines risk in terms of the resources available in the principal theater. Only decisive superiority of resources in the main theater can justify honing resources into a secondary effort. So in this case, Ukraine's principal theater or the main theater is in the eastern part of Ukraine. It's in the Donbass region. It's in Zaporozhye. So if your position is weaker than your enemy in the main theater, opening a secondary theater in other place, it's foolish act. This is what he's trying to explain, basically, right? So does anyone think the Ukrainian Armed Forces command decisive military superiority over Russia in eastern Ukraine, the major fighting front? Unless they do, writes Clausewitz, Kiev is courting unacceptable risk in Kursk. in all likelihood, he would fault Ukrainian military and political leaders for strategic indiscipline. On its face, Ukraine's invasion of Kursk might resemble a macro-scale indirect attack up to warm Sun Tzu's heart. It certainly took Moscow by surprise, but here is the thing. Like Clausewitz 2 millennia later, the Chinese saga fretted constantly about risk and resources. If the general's army boasts 10 times as many soldiers as the enemy, he exhorts the general to order the foe surrounded. If the general enjoys 5 times the manpower, he should attack. Acting otherwise flirts with disaster. If weaker numerically, Sun Tzu goes on, be capable of withdrawing, and if in all respects unequal, be capable of eluding him, for a small force is but booty for one more powerful. I think this article explains everything. Strategic prudence from 19th century Europe and ancient China alike urges Kiev to wind down the Kursk operation and consolidate scarce manpower and resources to defend what matters most. Enough with adventurism. On whose side are you guys? I am on the side of the second article, which says this is adventurism, and Ukraine doesn't have enough manpower to open a secondary front, whereas the main theater in eastern Ukraine is vulnerable and the towns are falling. This is a foolish act. This is adventurism. This is gambling, and it will reflect negatively on Kiev itself. And you can see the bombing of Kiev and all these influencers in Kiev who are like cheering and boasting about this invasion of Kursk. Now they're the ones saying, please help us. Ukraine is under attack again. Kiev, God help us, this and that. It's unfortunate that the repetition of the same mistake over and over again, not understanding that the only way of this out of this conflict is diplomacy. You cannot win against Russia. How many times this has to be repeated for these talking heads in Kiev, in London, and elsewhere to understand that this war cannot be won through military means against Russia. The only way to win this war against Russia is nuclear war. And then it's a mutual distraction for everyone. Russia sees it as an existential threat. This is not Putin's war. This is Russia's war. And Putin represents the head of the state, and there are people thinking about strategies in Russia, and they see the expansion of NATO as an existential threat for them. And I have read in also American journals, for example, in the American Conservative Journal, which says, I'm paraphrasing, that any respected superpower would have invaded Ukraine with the expansion of NATO to the east and coming on the borders with Ukraine. Because remember, if Ukraine becomes a NATO member, then Americans will have nuclear weapons there. And with nuclear weapons in Ukraine, the United States will have the advantage of time. Because once you include Ukraine into NATO and install your nuclear weapons, then the first attack of a nuclear attack, let's say, against Russia, it will take probably 60 seconds or less to attack. This is something that I have to... anyways, I will check it later. But it's a matter of seconds, right? In any scenario of a nuclear confrontation between both sides, there is also the factor of the second attack. So if the Americans attack Moscow first and Russia doesn't have the time to respond, then the United States will win. So geographically speaking, Ukraine is the neighbor of Russia, and American nuclear weapons on Ukrainian territory means that the Americans have the advantage of time at any point in the future if there is, God forbid, a nuclear exchange between the both sides, because the Russians will not have enough time to respond against the American side if they use nuclear weapons. And rest assured that the United States has enough psychopathic people and enough psychopaths that such a scenario could be possible in the future. Now, I asked the former ambassador of the UK to Syria and Bahrain about his opinion that there are reports that say this was managed, directed, supervised, and urged, and let's say encouraged by the British side and not the American side. The Americans were not happy with this incursion into the Russian territories, but the Brits, who are the most hawkish, let's say, country in this arena when it comes to the NATO proxy war vis-a-vis Russia. The Brits are the ones who sabotaged the peace talks at the beginning, you remember. And now they're probably the ones who ordered this attack into Russia. And I asked him, and this is what he said in this case. Today I read something on X. I wanted to ask you about this, and this is unrelated to Palestine, but about Ukraine. And the allegation is that this incursion into Kursk, this was a British instruction for the Ukrainians to invade a Russian territory and not an American plan, and the Americans are unhappy. Do you see that there is a difference of opinion between the UK and the US in terms of this, in regards to the incursion into Russia?
Yes, I find this believable, unbelievable as it may seem, but almost from the beginning of the Ukraine crisis, the British have been more hawkish. And indeed, during the Syria conflict, we saw examples of this when, just after Trump was elected, Boris Johnson rushed across the Atlantic to try to persuade him to change his stated position on withdrawal of US troops from Syria. In fact, there are many parallels between the way the British have performed over Ukraine and the way they acted over Syria. The British are the first imperialists. The Americans are our students. And don't always like to follow the example of their previous masters. I find it quite believable that the Pentagon, which strangely is often a voice of sanity in Washington, I find it quite credible that this time the Pentagon are not over pleased by this adventurism. You see, the British, at the end of the day, will not pay any price, but the Americans might have to pay a price if they get drawn into open conflict with Russia. So the Americans have to show a bit more responsibility than the reckless British.
So this is what he said, the former ambassador, UK ambassador to Syria and Bahrain. I would just like to thank Kurumrod for becoming a YouTube member of Syriana Analysis. We are around 400 people watching this live now between YouTube and Rumble. I would highly appreciate it, guys, if you just hit the like button while you're watching. This really helps me, helps the content to reach to more people, and I can navigate through the algorithm. It's quite obvious that the channel is shadow banned, right? I have now 78,000 or so subscribers, and people cannot see the content on their timeline. People tell me that they have to type the name Syriana Analysis in the search so that they can find the channel and then watch the video. So if you want to help me with the algorithm and this suppression, guys, please just hit the like button. That would be very appreciative. Now we have another players in this conflict that is very important, and that is China. And China just reiterated its call for more countries to endorse its 12-point peace plan for Ukraine, which was unveiled in February 2023. So what are these 5 points? Number one, ceasefire, immediate halt to hostilities and withdrawal of Russian troops. 2, political settlement, resumption of peace talks between Ukraine and Russia with a focus on Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. 3, humanitarian assistance, ensuring safe passage for civilians, preventing attacks on civilians, and providing aid to those affected by the conflict. 4th, nuclear safety, preventing the use of nuclear weapons and ensuring the safety of nuclear facilities. 5, grain exports, ensuring the export of Ukrainian grain to avoid food shortages and economic instability. So as you can see, we have countries that are adding fuel to fire, such as the UK, the United States, and the rest of the countries giving all these weapons and want for the conflict to continue. It's a war of attrition. They're happy with it. They're generating billions with the profits of these weapons, and they're having exclusive deals to reconstruct Ukraine, this and that. And at the same time, Russians are dying. This isn't a good business. This is what the American officials are saying, right? And it's not like something that I'm speculating or analyzing here. This is how they see the conflict, but it's happening on the expense of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians who perish perished. And millions of them have become refugees, displaced, and many of them lost their homes, right? They don't care about it. But the Chinese side is at least presenting a diplomatic solution for this conflict, and I applaud. And I applaud this role. And it's needed nowadays because the United States has lost all credibility as a superpower, because as a superpower you also have a duty of policing, and not like coming and raising your finger like that, but rather to end the conflicts and exert pressure on governments and countries around the world to end these conflicts and sit on a table of negotiation. This is not what the Americans are doing. The Americans are benefiting from these wars, and therefore we need an alternative power such as China to present itself as the police of the world and activate diplomacy. And remember, those are not my words. This is from the Newsweek, right? In the Newsweek, they say that China is the world's #1 diplomatic power ahead of the US. So China is the world's largest diplomatic power with a wider presence across the globe than the United States, according to a new report shared with Newsweek. Though the lead is slim, the report highlights the product of Beijing's efforts to expand its influence amid an intensified geopolitical competition with Washington. Set to be published Sunday morning, the Lowy Institute's 2024 Global Diplomacy Index ranks 66 nations and territories by the number of diplomatic postings they possess around the world. China came in first place with 274 posts in its diplomatic network, closely followed by the US with 271. Yes, but the difference between China and the United States is that the US embassies are also CIA and NSA nests, and they're planning on first persuading the governments into accepting their terms in trade deals, taxation, and also buying or prioritizing the importing the products from the United States or tech from the United States. Two, if they don't like the policies you're pursuing, they plan on coups, they plan on regime change, and they support the opposition in this country. This is not what diplomatic missions should do. And sometimes when I see the American embassy, for example, in Armenia, in Lebanon, those are military compounds. It's very clear that they are like, it's huge. You don't need all this huge compound for a diplomatic mission. It's full of CIA, NSA, and other sorts of security personnel and assets. And similarly, they do it also in Europe. They spy on politicians in Europe. They listen to their conversations and phone calls. They did it with Angela Merkel, and probably they're doing it with the current chancellor now. They tape and wire all the communications and all the WhatsApps and all the texts that we send and we receive also in Europe. This is not what diplomacy is about, right? This is what I'm trying to say. Unlike China, which is trying to mediate between countries, Iran, Saudi Arabia, they bring the Palestinian factions together. They're trying to end the war in Syria. Their economic model is based on stability. If there is no stability in Central Asia, in the Caucasus, in the Middle East or West Asia to the Mediterranean, then the Chinese economic model cannot reach to its maximum level of success. So in their mind, stabilizing these regions is beneficial for their own economic interests. This is the difference between the Chinese and the American approaches. You can criticize the communism in China as much as you want, and you don't want probably to live in China and accept their terms, politics, and economical model, etc. But they are not forcing you to accept it in your own country. That's the difference between the US and China. So, guys, we are headed to the elections in the United States, and as you know, the founder of Telegraph, Pavel Durov, is being held in custody by French authorities as part of a cybercriminality investigation, the Paris prosecutor said in a statement on 26th of August. The Russian-born billionaire and founder of the popular messaging app was arrested upon landing in the French capital on Saturday evening. The prosecutor's statement mentioned 12 different offenses under investigation for complicity in organized crime, including illicit transactions, child pornography, fraud, and the refusal to disclose information to authorities. This is just my speculation, guys. This is a war against information. I mean, do I think that there is no criminal activities on Telegram? No, I do believe that there is criminal activities, such as on WhatsApp. There are drug dealers on WhatsApp. All around the world. Child trafficking on these apps. Do the heads of these apps go to jail? No, the main reason, the direct reason, the first consideration for this is Telegram's refusal to share personal information and our data with authorities. This is the problem. And the Israelis also have approached Telegram several times, and especially after the October 7 events, trying to take down some of the channels and content. They don't want for the people to watch this content. They don't want for some channels to be on Telegram. And they didn't receive, or they didn't see any collaboration and positive attitude from the Telegram side, unlike on other platforms, for example, Facebook, Meta. They are very blatant and open about their censorship and suppression of the voices coming from West Asia in favor of Israel. And they have taken down many channels recently, including the Cradle from Facebook, from Instagram, so Meta basically. And the Israeli Haaretz, for example, says that Telegram has proved a massive challenge for Israel since the start of the war. This includes sensitive data leaks from Israel acquired by hackers and released on Telegram channels. The Israeli newspaper noted that while many tech firms have streamlined mechanisms through which states can reach out to them to censor content, Telegram is considered the least cooperative of them all. I'm not going to mention which platform, but I have a friend who works for a very famous social media platform in content moderation in the Arabic language, and they constantly receive instructions from the Israeli government, and the Israeli government sends instructions to this platform, and this platform sends these instructions to their employees so that they enforce it on the people. And what content they should suppress, what content should be taken down, which video, which photo, everything. So Telegram refused to do that. So has Israel has any hand in this? I don't know, probably. Israel has been successful in controlling and censoring information on other social media apps, including Instagram, Facebook, X, and TikTok, via the lobbying of Cyberwell, an NGO with extensive links to the Israeli intelligence. So we don't know now. The UAE says that the owner of Telegram, Pavel Durov, is also an Emirati citizen, and they asked the French authorities to facilitate any consular and legal things that help and support that he needs in this case. In my opinion, this is a war against information. The elites are panicking about they are losing the argument and they're losing the narrative. And in the era of social media, the people are the citizen journalists. Ordinary people like myself, we have decided to become citizen journalists to tell you the truth about what's happening around the world. And they are scared of that. And that's why you see, for example, people like Richard Medhurst, he was arrested, detained in the UK. And he's been, I'm sure they will press charges against him, and they detained him under the Terrorism Act or something. Imagine that. And believe me, there are, I don't want to say how many or I don't even know about it, but there are so many people who are ready to do terrorist acts in Europe, and they are received with open arms because they say they are refugees. And I'm not talking about ordinary people, right? I'm talking about people who had combat experience in Iraq, in Syria, in Afghanistan, for example, and they were fighting alongside or with, or they were part of terrorist organizations. And they live here among us. One of them committed this very heinous terrorist act against innocent people in Germany, slaughtering, I think, three people with a knife. And he comes from where? From Syria, from the same country that I came from. And he was part of ISIS. In 2015 and 16, I made a huge mistake by trying to explain to the German public that in Syria we have the vast majority of the people are just normal people. They don't carry knives or guns, or they rape, or they kill people. No, vast majority of them are just normal people, and they just want to have a better life. But we also have people who carried arms in Syria, and they fought against the Syrian government because in their mind, this was a holy war against an infidel secular regime, and they wanted to establish what is called quote-unquote Islamic State. These people are very radical, and these people, rest assured, if they see me in the street, they would just slice my throat without hesitation. I also feel unsafe. I am also Syrian, but I'm a resident of Germany and I feel unsafe. And rest assured, these people, we cross by and we see each other in the streets. And there are people send me from Syria pictures. Those are just, colleagues, friends. Some people do not even know me, but they know my name and they see like I live in Germany and they see like, oh, this is a famous guy, between quotations. I mean, I don't see myself famous, but some people see like, yo, he's famous. He has a YouTube channel. He has tens of thousands of followers. And they like send me pictures, say, oh, look, this guy was a militant in Syria. He's on a PKC. He's on a tank. He was fighting. He had Al-Qaeda beard style, Tell the authorities, Nothing will happen, in my opinion. And I'm sick and tired of this because this type of people, they make all the Syrians look like criminals, ISIS, rapists, and we are not able to distinguish among them. The far right is so stupid, they can't even distinguish between Syrians and criminals. All Syrians become all of a sudden criminals and rapists. And the other side, the people who like open borders, they're like, oh no, refugees are welcome. Yes, refugees are welcome. Should be welcomed. I am not a resident, I'm not a German. I'm just a resident of Germany, but I pay taxes. And from my taxes, many families and refugees are also living, right? My taxes are going also to finance them. And I'm happy about that. I don't complain about that because I see this is a human duty. But there are people who say they are refugees. They are not refugees. Why is this so controversial? Myself, I've been accused of being radical right, far right, neo-Nazi, fascist, just for pointing out this. There is a difference between someone from Syria who is a victim of a war and came here asking for a shelter, and he receives a refugee status. 100%, it's okay, it's fine, of course, why not? But if someone was fighting and carrying arms, he's part of the problem. This is why we have a refugee crisis in Syria, right? But to begin with, these people who carried arms against the government in Syria, and we have to say this, we have to be honest. These people who carried arms against the Syrian government, call the Syrian government whatever you want. You want to call it a dictatorship, you want to call it an authoritarian, you want to call him Assad a tyrant, call him whatever you want, it doesn't matter. But the people who fought against him, what are they? Are they democratic rebels? It's a blatant lie. They are the vast majority of them are either part of Nusra, which is Al-Qaeda affiliate, or ISIS, or Ahrar al-Sham, or Jaish al-Islam, or this and that. And all these groups, they don't believe in democracy. They believe in an Islamic caliphate based or pursued by violence, political violence. This is what they believe in. So accepting this type of people in Germany, it's going to lead into problems, basically. Just like they did the troubles in Syria, right? But if you go now to Syria, you rarely see these people because most of them left the country. And the vast majority of them left to Turkey. And we don't know the numbers, but if you go to Syria nowadays, you're not going to cross and meet someone who is like a former ISIS or former Al-Qaeda walking in the streets and stabbing people, raping people. You're not going to see these things. And if it happens, there is going to be severe punishment against this type of people. So if you're a German, Think about that. And I wish nothing but safety and security for the German people and prosperity. And when I spoke about this case, it's because I care. But your media, your politicians, they just waged a brutal campaign against me, and they demonized me, and they wanted to deport me from Germany for saying this. You pay the price now. What can I say? I'm not saying that Syrians are shouldn't be received. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying that there are radical elements among the Syrians that Germany should not accept, because these things will happen later. And probably those are 1%, I don't know, 0.5%, 2%, nobody knows. But they are, like in any other country. Anyways, guys, this was a brilliant live streaming. I see that there are tens of comments here. I really appreciate all of you. I would really appreciate if you just hit the like button before leaving this conversation and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Let's go to the 80,000 subscriber in 2 weeks, maybe. I don't know. That would be great. Let's hope that I could reach 100K at the end of this year. With your help, I can do it. So if you are, if you want to help me in this, I would be very, very grateful for you guys. And only if you can, I'm not asking anything from you, but only if you can support independent journalistic work and independent analysis that I am bringing to you like this, you can become a patron. The patron, on Patreon, you can buy me a coffee. It just costs you $2 per month, but it's a great help for me to continue and bring to you quality content, and also make this work better, because some of you are saying that I should also make it better. So this is also an opportunity. Only if you can afford, become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. And I will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow is Wednesday, right? Yes. 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. Peace be upon you guys and upon your families. Salam.